Let's try again.
Let's try again.
So
turn off your other device.
I know. I'm working on it.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Give me a second. Okay,
this should do. So let's see. Sorry. So out of the respondent, there was overall a consensus, at least among panelists, that the epidemic is having potentially a short-term impact. And among the rest of the participants who are not panelists, the views were more, let's say, mixed. Now, if we dive in a bit more specifically in terms of regional expectations, what we see is dominantly across most of the regions an expectation for some decrease, short-term decrease. But there is an exception. For Sub-Saharan Africa, there is a little bit more an expectation of an increase. As for Oceania and Northern Africa, or Western Asia, the views are much more mixed, with difficult to get a sense of any specific trend. So if we go a bit more into the magnitude of this trend, of these expected trends, here in this tabulation at the bottom, you can see the regional breakdown, and in the columns, the percentile distribution of the respondents. So, and then on the right side, the same information as a box plot. And as you can see again, in the box plot at the top, you can see basically that across the 20-something respondents, on average, the mean or median expectation is close to zero, and the variation is plus minus a little bit more into the positive, but it's relatively weak expectation of, let's say, increase in fertility. When we look at the other regions, the expectation of the decrease on average across the different respondents in terms of order of magnitude is between 3 to 10%. And depending if you look at the median or at the mean, we speak basically a range of 5 to 10%, with a smaller set of 5 to 10% of respondents expecting more extreme, up to about minus 20%. So as you can see, there is a general expectation of some short-term decrease, more pronounced with Europe and Northern America. And based on this kind of results, let me go to the next slide, and I'll come back to the set of questions. The second part of the question was, when can we expect a recovery? And here we have a bit of a mixed kind of response pattern. It's basically a multimodal distribution, with a bit more people replying for 2023. Next, a substantial number of people who cannot really decide, and then 2025, and a few with 2024. So the exact timing of the recovery remains a bit fuzzy. But basically between 23 and 25. Now, in terms of interactive discussion, I have a couple of questions that I would like to get the rest of the group to react and to comment. First is, based on what we have seen in the previous sessions over the last day and a half, do you have any surprise from this kind of survey results? Number one. And then in terms of pattern of decline and recovery, as we have seen across different presenters, there is a question of to what extent in the rebound phase is it, should we expect not only a rebound, but even a temporary rise above the pre-COVID level before to go back to the long-term trend? And then the next questions would be, to what extent can we expect, especially for Far East Asia, countries like China, eventually some kind of exceptionalism in terms of this type of recovery? And what about for South Asia and countries like India? And finally, as we have seen across different presenters, with the use and the analysis of monthly birth statistics, there are a number of issues in various countries, as Stuart showed in East Asia, but eventually even for some of the OECD countries. The question is, how much can we really use out of this kind of information to guide us with expectation for 2021, based on all these data issues that exist in terms of changes? May I open the floor and get from the different participants, anyone who has any comments or reactions? You can raise your hand or you can speak. I see Susanna.
Yes, I raised my hand. Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for this survey. I think it reflects what we see around us. And the surprise I get from Latin America is that there are some people thinking that there will be an increase. And for me, that is because of Mexico. I just learned that in Mexico, there was a 30% increase in adolescent fertility. And that might be the case for Latin America, and why fertility would increase instead of decreasing, and I think most of people would say would decrease in the short term. So that's the fluctuation there. That was a surprise for me. I have an echo here, but one thing more I would like to say. For me, the short term will depend of the continuation of this pandemic, and the Indian case and the Brazilian case for me are very exemplary there, of not exemplary indeed, and with the risk of pregnant women for the new variants are higher, and people know this now. So I think this would have important variation. Differences in countries, at least in India and Brazil for the 2021. So I think the 2020 fluctuations cannot be replicated to the 2021 as you have asked for Brazil and maybe for India too, but for Brazil, I'm sure cannot be replicated, the 2020 monthly rates to 2021, because I think will be more bigger impact in 2021. Over to you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I can't see all the hands if you are raising your hand. So please speak if you have, if you want to contribute or to react to any of these questions or results.
Maybe Thomas can speak. I see he texted. He has a comment question.
Patrick, yeah, thank you. I would like to jump in with a suggestion that maybe the way we are thinking about the future fertility trends should also depend on what we are thinking or expecting about the future of the coronavirus pandemic. Because if we believe that the distinct way the coronavirus is affecting our societies will affect fertility, then in some countries we hope we are seeing the tail of the pandemic with most of the population becoming vaccinated during this year. Whereas in some of the low-income countries in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, the vaccination drive can take 1 or 2 more years to complete, which means that there is a distinct danger that some of these countries will see more waves, quite severe waves of the pandemic in the next 1 or 2 years, which would mean that the fertility impact in these regions of the direct infection period may last longer than, say, in Europe or the United States or Japan, East Asia.
Thank you. Does anyone else have additional comments or concerns or suggestions?
Well, I saw Marcus also commenting on the topic Thomas just addressed. I'm wondering if he wants to add to Thomas' comment.
Thanks, Caroline. No, I think Thomas spoke very well. I think I was thinking along the same lines that we need to understand the pattern of when COVID will get out of the picture and when economies will be set to recover, right? So that's all a function of how we're going to get people vaccinated and what coverage we're going to have in the population. I don't know, how this is going across the world, and we need a better sense of that as well. Now, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but if variants of the virus are being developed across the globe, and borders are still open, we also don't even know that the places that are currently doing well in terms of vaccination, that will be covered for the developments of the virus. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I hate to say it this way, but there's a lot of uncertainty here, especially on the management of the disease, which is the primary factor for what we want to consider decisions about fertility, right?
I see Francesco, who has a question or who wants to speak. Please, Francesco.
Thank you. I'm linking up with Marco's point on uncertainty. And I think one of the implications for you guys is not only on the levels, but also on the variance. And you see here, if this was an expert panel of forecasters, what you will see is that with some exceptions, experts have heterogeneous views. So I don't know, I've worked on expert-based forecasting, the kind of defining variance, and this gives a picture of uncertainty. And for you, what is relevant is that you have uncertainty on starting points for fertility, and maybe uncertainty on the course for next years. So there are two lines here. One is Ron Lee's yesterday line saying, okay, just ignore COVID for longer term forecasting. Okay, that can be done. But for shorter term, basically, this gives us very high uncertainty. And that's kind of the main lesson I see also from the survey. Experts give an uncertain figure.
Thank you. As you know, we need to make some assumptions no matter what. The good news in some ways is basically that this work that in the UN we are doing every 2 years, there is a reassessment of the situation, the data, and eventually the projections. So as more data, more information will become available, we can improve and refine all of this current situation. But for this year, for this round, we need we still need to make some assumptions. And as Stuart was mentioning yesterday, it's possible that we may be wrong. Hopefully, we can try to be, let's say, not too inaccurate, but especially with the uncertainty bound. In principle, in this new revision, we are trying to incorporate for the baseline itself a wider potential range of possible values. So in terms of reflecting that range of uncertainty, we should have a bit better way of doing it in terms of being able to predict with accuracy whether it will go up or down within a year or two. As you can see, there is a great doubt about the accuracy of a lot of those trends. John Bongartz wanted to react also. Please, John. Can you switch on your microphone, maybe?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have two comments. One comment and a question. I think a great deal of time is spent on looking at short-term changes that have occurred and will occur in the next few months. And these changes are the result of both quantum and tempo effects. And it's very hard to make out what that implies for coming years. So my suggestion would be that we pay more attention to changes in preferences, fertility preferences. In a few cases, like the US, we have fairly good data on preferences, and I hope that we can do the same for other countries, because if preferences and long-term preferences change, then I think your long-term fertility projections will have to change as well. So that's my first point. The second is simply a question. The original plan, if I believe, was to release a new set of estimates and projections this year in June, I thought. Has that plan now been shelved, and what is the reason for doing so?
It has been delayed to March of next year for a couple of reasons that we briefly mentioned yesterday morning, which have to do with the major upgrade that we are currently doing in terms of the production system, in terms of the information from the countries to create annual time series, deal with single age data, and in addition to try to synchronize our ongoing work of this revision with the work that WHO is also doing jointly with us on estimating the mortality impact of the COVID pandemic. So maybe John Wilmus want to say a few words on this part as well?
No, thank you. One final point. I think we're right in the middle of the most rapid changes induced by the COVID. I think in a few months more, you'll have much more information. And I think you would want to monitor the situation very closely rather than draw conclusions from what you have right now. You'll learn a great deal more in the next 6 months. And hopefully you can wait with your fertility projections a little longer.
Thank you. I hope so. The challenge, as you know, is the delay sometimes to get new information. And in this context, especially with the surveys, the classic demographic surveys on which we rely for a lot of countries have been disrupted a lot over the last year, and therefore there is going to be a substantial lag between new survey data and this new, let's say, gap in information. I saw Li Wen raising his hand. Please. And also Henry and Michaela. So maybe Li Wen and then Henry.
I just have a quick comment to follow John's suggestion here. And one thing, I'm trying to do something with the US and look at the impacts of fertility, mortality. And I believe that what John says that to look at the long-term trend, long trend is more important. And even in the US case, well, mortality, fertility has been playing a rather significant role. And it will even drive the population growth to a very low or even negative, or depends on how you look at the scenario. But the long-term impacts are relatively small if we don't assume the long-term changes in, say, fertility preferences. And I think that's something like, at least give us some confidence that the projection for the UN, say, UN long-term 50 years, 100 years, the projection with or without considering the uncertainty of COVID-19 will not affect the long-term population growth. Yeah, that's one comment I have.
Thank you. Maybe before to give the floor to Henry and Mihaela, just as a background piece of information, a lot of the users of the information that the population division produce in terms of population estimates are used by a wide range of users in different domains. And a lot of people are focusing on current population estimates, on what is the situation last year, this year, next year, in terms of various demographic indicators. And everyone has been looking almost with a microscope to annual change, including to the impact, in this case, of the pandemic on all kinds of demographic issues. So I agree with you overall that for the long-term, long-term projections, the questions are somewhat different, but there is a very different kind of request and interest and focus on current population estimates to be as precise, or at least there is an expectation that has increased over the years from a wider and wider community of users of information, that the information that is produced is becoming as accurate and as up-to-date as possible to reflect recent situations. So this inflation of expectation also creates a high demand on what and how this nowcast gets produced to try to be as close as possible to something plausible. Henry, and then Mihaela.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I had, posted some comments in the chat, but I was basically echoing on the uncertainty. I mean, we understand the pandemic is unpredictable in many ways, and even in some of the countries, the preventive or mitigation strategies, sadly, they are not being followed properly. And also, as we are relying on the vaccines, I mean, there's a lot of vaccine hesitance in some of the countries. Unfortunately, even in our region, we have a few countries, and this is a concern. And Patrick, you're right regarding even the modeling. When COVID started, there was an interest to find out, what will happen in the next 6 months, and we know some of the projections of COVID cases have been moving left and right, and no one, wants to rely on some of these modeling results because it's just too uncertain. So much as we are looking for the impact on the current population, but I think there's too much that we don't know, and we don't know in which direction things will move. So I'm not surprised with some of the results that have come out from the survey. So I just wanted to echo on that area. And even for some countries, let's pick Sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, we know there are a few countries, probably one country, South Africa, which has been hit hard by the pandemic, but there are other countries which have high fertility, but they haven't been hit hard by the pandemic, although we know that at the macro level, the economies are suffering because of the global impact of the pandemic. But how will those countries respond to these dynamics? So I still see a lot of uncertainties. We can make assumptions, but better to focus on things which are clear than trying to fit in everything which is just too uncertain. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mihaela?
Actually, the first comment was just a response to Francesco, that I think it's very important also to see the positive aspects of the pandemic, that it will lead to a push in terms of digitalization, which also has positive side effects, could have positive side effects for fertility, but that is more the long run. And I just to Henry's comment that we don't know and we should rely on what we know. I'm not sure. I mean, if one should, at least for Europe, take into account also the projection, the forecast of the economists that they make on the development of the economies in Europe and how last that pandemic will last. And I think the projections are more positive that Europe will overcome that crisis faster, and I'm not sure if that will be considered to take advice of the economist for this round of population projections.
Does anyone else have any additional inputs, feedback, comments? What about the situation of East Asia, including China, with somewhat this rather from the presentations that we have seen over the last, especially it was yesterday, in terms of the the expectation that a lot of those changes are expected to not necessarily being followed with some kind of recovery. What's the overall view of most of the panelists on this kind of expectation? Because there was not much discussion on some of these results. Is it something that we should consider, that East Asia experience such a specific situation, that it may be different from what we are eventually either witnessing or expecting to see with some of the other OECD countries in terms of this pattern of decline and rebound?
Patrick, here, Suzanne, I just have a guess about that, because I think China and Japan and others were hit less with the COVID because they had this previous experiences with the corona and the SARS. So maybe we should look at what happened with the SARS pandemic previously to see what would be the responses for the COVID. And I think it would be much different from the previous one.
Thank you. Anyone else has any additional inputs or comments on this part?
Hello, this is Amy Suzuki from the World Bank.
Yes, please.
Hi, just regarding Japan, there is information on the number of pregnancy registration, which I think you can use for at least to have better information on the fertility 2021. I can share the information with you after this meeting. It's written in Japanese, so I can help you with that.
Thank you. Any more comments? In terms of the timing, let's say the uncertainty on the timing for some recovery, any additional insight or comments beside the fact that basically there is a great uncertainty about what to expect and when to expect it? Any additional insights or reaction to this?
Patrick, may I say a few words on that?
Yes, please.
Thanks. I think the really curious thing, which of course this is highly uncertain for the highly developed countries, will be the possibility that some of them will not go back to the normal as it was widely expected after the financial crisis around 2008, 2012, that countries may go back to normal once the recession is over. And the experience of countries with higher fertility rates, and I mean higher within the low fertility world, so Western Europe, United States, the Nordic countries, this experience is that they never went really back to normal, and that their fertility now is 10–20% lower than it was before the financial crisis. So the question mark is whether it's possible that some countries and regions will not go back to normal and their fertility will be lower for a longer period of time. But I don't have a strong view on whether this is likely to happen or not.
Does anyone, any other panelist has any other views or input or insight on this part of the issues? So if not, I can go to the last part of the questionnaire. The way the questions were organized, it was initially to try to get the different participants to think a little bit more on some of those questions in terms of regions or in terms of levels of fertility. And when we organized the sequence of the questions, the region-specific questions were asked more toward the end, but with this initial kind of contextual set of questions. And for that part of the more, let's say, general level of differences between groups of countries, different groups of regions, there is an overall consensus among the different respondents of basically that, yes, in terms of differences for recovery, there is some expectation of some variations. So that's somewhat consistent with, I think, the qualitative exchange that we had over the last couple of days. And in terms of the age pattern, the impact on the age pattern, there is overall also somewhat of a consensus that, yes, if there is an impact, then it's likely to create some delays with various cohorts, especially for the first birth or for the younger women. So that kind of, if there is a short-term effect, that it's an effect concentrated eventually in specific aspects. There is an overall consensus on some of those. The big issue or the big challenge is really how do we translate this qualitative kind of expectations into eventually operational assumptions that we can use country by country. But that's the overall results of this mini survey. If you have additional insights to share with us, please keep in touch with us via email. And do any of you have additional comments or questions related to this part on these, let's say, assumptions or the challenges related to assumptions for our next revision? If you do, please let us know. Otherwise, I would like to give the floor to our director, John Wilmus, for the closing segment of this meeting. I see Guang Yu that raised his hand.
Okay, I just want to make a quick comment. So the special situation of China, so maybe China is not so special. So you look at Korea and Japan, they're in East Asia shares cultural similarity. And although China's size is big, but you look at the GDP per capita, female education level, and the labor employment participation rate, 20 years ago in South Korea, when the fertility entered below 1.5, you'll see a lot of similarity between China and South Korea. So just one comment. So I say, China maybe not so special.
I still see the hand for Liwen. Do you have additional comments you wanted to add, or your hand is still up?
Sorry, I thought I have already put down my hand.
That's okay. It's okay.
But that's fine. Actually, I wanted to make a comment on the first with China. I agree with Guang Yu that the fertility trend is very clear, and the impacts of COVID-19 seems, to my understanding, it's not actual significantly so considerable differ from other parts of the world. And so I think the trend in China will not be affected by COVID-19 that much. Actually, I want to have raise a question about the expectation in the low-income country, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, why we would expect an increase from the impacts of COVID-19. And do we have more observation and say from inside sub-Saharan countries, particularly look at the differences across regions with different levels of urbanization, for instance. And with that information, maybe we can say more about the short-term impacts and longer-term effects. So it's hard for me, I comprehend the understanding of increased trend due to COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else among the panelists have any additional input or feedback? I see Christine.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to that last comment about sub-Saharan Africa. And so far, we haven't seen the impact in terms of a decline in family planning in COVID-19. And I wanted to echo back to the Ebola crisis, especially in Liberia and Sierra Leone, where we saw a major impact on their family planning programs. But in the years since, they've both had decreased TFRs of over half the child in the last 5 years. So if countries can recover that quickly from Ebola, I don't know if you're going to see substantial increases in sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe a decrease in how fast fertility is decreasing, but I don't see an impact in terms of raising fertility.
Thank you. Any additional insights or comments from any panelist or participants? If not, I'll be happy to give the floor to our director, John Wilmos, for the closing segment. John, do you want to get the floor?
Thank you, Patrick. I'm happy to say a few words. It's difficult at the end of this meeting to try and give any sort of summary of the results. They're kind of all over the map to some degree, but I want to begin by thanking everyone for being there. And I think this has been a very interesting meeting. I've certainly learned a lot, and it's stimulated a lot of our thinking, I think, about how to approach these issues. But one of the overwhelming messages, I think, is about the uncertainty of the situation, that we really just don't know, especially in the short term, but also in the long term, what the impacts of COVID may be on fertility. And as I read through the notes of the meeting that had been prepared by my colleagues, I was struck by how many times there's mentions of fear and the role of fear in the fear from the pandemic and the impact that had, especially in the short term. And of course, if fear is driving behavior, then it's really unpredictable, because when populations may again become fearful of the situation and what impact that could have in the short term, it seems that's very unpredictable. And also, there are various things playing into that. For example, the uncertainty about the variants and what will happen with those, and what will happen with the speed of the vaccination rollout worldwide. There's real uncertainty about these factors, and that can play into people's fear and their reactions to that. So I think in the short term, there really is a lot of uncertainty about what the impacts may be. In the long term, I think I haven't heard much discussion about what some of the positive impacts of the building back better from the pandemic may be. That if some countries succeed in that, of course, in this country, in my country, the USA, there's been a major political turnover as well in recent months, and there are plans, or at least aspirations, of making some very fundamental changes in social programs, which could have long-term impacts. And I think we don't really know about the impacts of those sorts of social transformations, possible impacts on social inequality, which could then have long-term impacts on fertility. So I would say there's really a lot of uncertainty about the short term and the long term from my perspective. So only time will tell. I think that's been a common message also that's come through with many panelists, and John Bongard's point about waiting a few months that we may know quite a bit more and have some more, a better basis for choosing assumptions for WPP 2022. Yes, we decided to delay the production of the next revision. There were several factors that came together on this, but really the overriding concern was to have more time to be able to gather more information, both data and expert views to help guide the work and the work on fertility, on setting the assumptions across all variables. But on fertility, certainly we may benefit from from 6 more months of information, as John Bonnegart's pointed out. But also, as Patrick mentioned, there's an issue of coordinating with the World Health Organization on the mortality estimates. And so we just felt that there was a strong case for delaying the production of the next WPP to try and do a little bit better job to take these factors into account. So hopefully this meeting today and yesterday is going to play a role in that. I really appreciate your contributions, and it's nice to see all of you. I hope that we will be able to meet in person again someday. That would be very nice. But in the meantime, it's good that we've got these new tools, these new platforms that allow us to meet like this globally. Life is never going to be the same again. We know that. And so it's going to affect our academic work. It's going to affect the way that we all interact with each other. It may well affect people's choices about having children as well. So time will tell what the final impact will be. But thank you very much for your contributions and your insights. We really appreciate them, and we will do our best to take them into account as we work on putting out the next revision of the World Population Prospects. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in person in the near future. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Anything else from the organizers that we need to cover before we close? Carolina, anything?
Well, of course, I would also like to extend appreciation to all the panelists who joined from different time zones. Of course, some are now sleeping, but we asked them to contribute their thoughts later, since we're gonna present, and we're gonna also post this presentation, the final round of discussions on the website. So please, if you have any further thoughts, also on Patrick's slides, maybe they came a bit abrupt, so think about it. Anything, any thoughts, any ideas, any feedback, please let us know. And last but not least, of course, I also want to thank each and every one from the colleagues in the division who has contributed. I think pretty much everyone contributed. I don't want to mention names because for sure the list would be very long, but it shows we can do things together and we are successful. So thank you all and see you soon. If not on the screen, then in real. Take care. At least I don't have to wish you bon voyage.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.